So, buenas tardes, good afternoon, masal al khair. Welcome to this 10th lecture of Aula Árabe Universitaria program. We are joined today by Carmen Geha, activist and associate professor of public administration at the American University of Beirut, to whom I would like to extend our gratitude for accepting to participate in this session. Thank you very much, Carmen. We know you just right from another online meeting, and tomorrow you will have your other session in Aula Aula Mediterranea, which is the kind of sister program of Aula Árabe, but in the EMED, the Institute of the Mediterranean Studies. So once more, thank you very much for making a bit of time to connect today with us in spite of your tight agenda. I would have loved you to have you in Madrid, in Casa Árabe, in our premises, but hopefully soon, as we mentioned. So Carmen Geha is going to talk about studying in Lebanon, challenges for Syrian refugee children. From Casa Árabe, we have been following up the situation and the issue of refugees in the Middle East and its impact in the region in these last years in different roundtables and lectures. So it's quite relevant to analyze today, 10 years after the beginning of the Arab uprising or the so-called Arab Spring, when we are organizing also a series of conferences looking back to what has been this decade of changes and the challenges for the future, to see the implication this is having also in the field of education, and in particular in the education of children, whose choices for the future depend on this. So in that sense, host countries like Lebanon, that we are going to talk about today, have been or are bearing a heavy burden as a consequence of the arrival of Syrian refugees from the conflict of Syria. And this has been prolonged for these 10 years. And as mentioned, is of particular interest and importance to see the impact this is having on the education of refugee children who are even arrived 10 years ago or have been born already in this situation, and as such are following their school years, not only in difficult conditions, but also in a country with a social and sectarian structure and education policies different to what was their country of origin also. So to analyze these issues, we will have our guest speaker today. We are organizing this talk in collaboration with the BA program in Modern Languages at Untitled University, who are connecting from the university classroom today. So next, I would like to pass the floor to Laura de la Parra Fernández, director of the BA program and professor at Untitled University, who will be the one introducing Carmen Geha's lecture in the framework of their program of studies. So, but before that, let me just remind you some practical issues for the audience in Spanish. So, buenas tardes y bienvenidos a todos de nuevo. Recordaros simplemente que la sesión se está grabando y para evitar interferencias os pediríamos que por favor mantuvierais las cámaras y los audios apagados y que luego ya, para todos los que conectáis sobre todo desde vuestra casa o las universidades online, si queréis que vuestra asistencia quede registrada a efectos de la certificación de Aula Árabe, por favor poner en el chat vuestro nombre, apellidos, el programa universitario del que venís en la universidad, para que así quede registrado. Y luego, tras la conferencia de la profesora Geha, podéis hacer preguntas también a través del chat, tanto en inglés como en español, y yo se la trasladaré a ella. Pues nada, muchas gracias por vuestra participación y gracias también, Laura, por vuestra colaboración desde la universidad. Y nada, cuando quieras, bienvenido. Gracias. Thank you. Buena vida.
Muchas gracias. Okay, good evening, everyone. And well, first, I would like to thank Casa Árabe and especially Olivia Orozco for your support and for inviting us to collaborate with you in the Aula Árabe program. And I would also like to thank Carmen Geha for being here with us today. And I thank our students also for attending this talk, and I hope that you make the most of it. So Carmen Geha is an activist and associate professor of public administration at the American University of Beirut. She specializes in mass political mobilization and the challenges to political reform across the Arab Middle East and North Africa. She is a co-founder of the Center for Inclusive Business and Leadership for Women at the American University of Beirut, a regional reference on writing gender-inclusive employer policies across the region. She is also a co-founder of CARI Beirut, the Shake-Up, a network of more than 150 experts implementing a community-driven roadmap for the recovery of Beirut following the port explosion on August the 4th. She served also as founding director of the Education for Leadership in Crisis Scholarship Program for Afghan women at American University of Beirut. Carmen manages and oversees large portfolio of research programs and grants in 11 Arab MENA countries focused on women and women's economy and participation, as well as gender, peace, and security. Her work has been published in the Middle East Journal, the British Journal for Middle East Studies, Middle East Law Governance, Journal of Refugee Studies, and Social Movement Studies, among others. Carmen is an activist scholar and is interviewed regularly on local and international media about events in Lebanon and the region. Carmen regularly advises and consults for top international organizations, UN agencies, and government institutions across the region. She has worked in Libya, Myanmar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Iraq, among other places. She has most recently consulted as Senior Gender Advisor for UN Women in Lebanon. Carmen has a PhD in International Relations from the University of St. Andrews. She was the 2018-2019 Fellow in Social Sciences at the Institute for Advanced Study. She has been a visiting fellow at the Weiser Institute in Johannesburg, Witherhead Center at Harvard, and the Watson Institute in Brown University. So quite an impressive resume. Thank you, Carmen. And well, the frame of our program, or our program in just briefly, it's an interdisciplinary program where we study 3 languages from a transversal and interdisciplinary point of view. So not only focusing on the typical humanities studies that we do also study, like linguistics, culture, literature, history, and so on, but also with a focus on international relations, economy, marketing, so that the students can get a chance to see what the prospective future of a graduate in modern languages can be, both in academia and in the professional world, as well as in international institutions. And in particular, the students today come from 2 subjects, which are communication, written and oral communication skills with Professor Zain Al-Mood, and intercultural communication with Professor Ana Carballal, where they study how culture and language is really, really important when approaching policy matters, especially in a multicultural and globalized world nowadays. Well, and I just wanted to reflect about how policy and education is really important, and how they actually are the future of the world, and can actually have a part in changing things. So I hope that you enjoyed the talk, and that you take the chance to make questions and make the most of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
I really, really want to thank you, Olivia and Laura, for inviting me, because it pushed me to sit and go back to my research, and to sit and to think about ideas. Lebanon has gone through so much in the last 1.5 years, particularly after the port explosion. So it's been a while. I didn't get a chance to go back to concepts and to ideas, and to think about how we can come together as researchers, whether we are students or faculty, and think about the problems of the present and the future. The refugee crisis, whether it should still be called a crisis, because it has been already 10 years, so it is perhaps not a crisis, it is a reality. But this problem and this phenomena requires all of our disciplines. So what I thought about doing today, and I go back to the explosion because I felt that everything that I had learned doesn't matter so much. So I'm not here today to lecture you about the ways or the methods. I'm just going to share about what is it that I've been thinking about and researching that has been very much embedded in the community, and then see what are the questions that you are grappling with, and whether we could collaborate, and whether there are other questions that you are thinking about as students that we've not thought about. So I hope that this is okay, and I hope that we can proceed in an interactive manner. I will take just 15 minutes and tell you what is it I've been thinking about ever since the conflict in Syria started 10 years ago, almost to the day. I think the last time I was in Damascus was February 2010. And the title of the presentation, or just, the presenting of ideas, is Studying in Hell. And I didn't get the word hell because I wanted to say hell, but because the Lebanese president of the Republic, General Michel Aoun, on September 10, 6 weeks after the explosion, told the press that if Lebanon would not be forming a government, it would be on its road to hell. And so I wanted to capture a really state terminology as to where we are at right now in Lebanon, and what would it look like to study in hell, and what we can do as active researchers. So I will talk a little bit about the politics of hell, just to give you a background, and if I go more than 4 minutes, you should stop me, but just to give you a background about what is happening. It is not my intention to position Lebanon as exceptional. I think that there are various variations of hell, people that are forced to migrate, to leave their homes, to flee violence and persecution, are not on vacation. So they are in different types of hell, the worst of which may be Lebanon. But I don't mean here to draw a picture that is very particular for Lebanon, but rather about young people that need to leave their homes, that need to adapt to a new language and a new structure, and what that looks like for them. So if I become too Lebanon, if I'm too Lebanon focused, please draw me back into whether you are researching other parts of Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, or if the variables that I discussed that are related to Lebanon strike a chord, such as language, citizenship, education, then tell me if this echoes with your area of research. So I would start with a brief overview, and then I'll talk about findings that are emerging from a 2-year ethnography around schooling, and particularly 9th graders, so kids around 12 to 16 years of age, and then talk about a little bit the future and how young people think about their future. But first, I wanted to kind of put the ball in your court in terms of thinking about this lecture so you don't get bored, because I know that some of you maybe are students and you have to take this class, but just think about, you have to write a thesis or a paper. It's been a decade, 10 years. What do we know about the refugee crisis or the refugee problem? And what is it that we don't know? There is a growing literature on the politics of ignorance. So we know the numbers, right? We know that 1 in 4 students will not finish school. We know that increase in gender-based violence, child marriage, unemployment, we know the numbers. But what is it that we don't know also about these numbers, where there is a nuance and where refugee voices are not brought to the table? So I want you to start thinking about, when you're writing a paper or a project or whatever, what is it that we know in terms of a hard number or a hard reality, and what don't we know? What can the EU do to support Syrian refugee education? You are all studying at a university in Spain. What has the EU done that has been right or wrong around refugee education, not just in Lebanon, but all over the world? What have been the shortcomings in preparing future generations? So I remember when the refugee crisis in Lebanon started, we were rushing to put kids in school, that we need to have students registered in schools. But now we know that there are shortcomings as it pertains to civic education, relationships, discrimination, violence. So what have been the shortcomings? It's important to put kids in school and to teach them math and science and English, but it's not enough in preparing future generations. How can research better drive policies in the region? You are based in an academic institution that also cares very much about the Mediterranean region and about the Arab world. How can research better drive policies? So we're not just writing papers and doing presentations. How can we influence policy, and what can we do as researchers? I want you to think about that when I'm presenting, because I don't know the answer. I'm hoping that you can help me. This big picture, about 1 million or so refugees left war and persecution, and they resettled in a very messy and very dangerous situation. Lebanon has a power sharing political system, meaning the only way to be represented in politics is to belong to a sectarian party. Hezbollah and his allies have the majority today in Lebanon's governance system and are active participants in the war in Syria. All of this was very bad. 90% of Syrians settle in informal settlements. There isn't a direct policy that monitors them. They are blamed for a deteriorating economy. They were part in rounds of fire and clashes in the north of Lebanon between 2013 and 2016. All of this was so bad until the revolution happened, police violence, crushing of the revolution, utter financial collapse. The lira to the dollar was 1,500. Today it is at 11,000. So ability, purchasing power to eat and drink and to move has been substantially decreased. I don't know economics, 100%, 160%, you make the math. And then the Beirut port explosion, of course, where in a split second, 200 people lost their lives and 300,000 people lost their homes. So this is where Syrian refugees are at. They're not on vacation. What has the narrative coming out from European Union, UN agencies focused on? This really upsets me, I can't stand it. UN Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, I think this is 2016, says the following: Lebanon is a key pillar in the international framework for protecting Syrian refugees. Without it, the entire system would collapse. And I believe that this kind of narrative that positions Lebanese government and Lebanese state institutions as saviors, as doing so well for taking in so many refugees, is part of the problem. Syrian refugees do not have the right for mobility, they don't have the right for education, they don't have the right for employment. The resilience narrative is very, very dangerous. The downside of it is that we misplace responsibility. Lebanon, as you well know, I hope you know, is not a signatory to the 1951 Convention on Refugees. So Syrians actually are not even treated as refugees. This responsibility that is misplaced from the government, thrown upon communities and NGOs at the expense of key reforms, fosters a status quo in return of aid. So refugees become a card, okay? You want to fund education? Great, we will put them in schools, but give us more money, at the expense of reforms, legislation, human rights, and protection. So this is where the refugees came. They came into a very bad situation, stuck in a resilience narrative. And the role of the UN in the last 10 years has not been what we expect from UN agencies. So while we expect that our own government may fall short of international declarations of human rights, because our government oppresses its own citizens, not just refugees, the UN has not been any better. Between 2011 and 2014, when the borders were open, there was basically a policy of no policy. Unlike in Turkey and in Jordan, when Syrians came in and found camps and ways of organizing, there was basically nothing. Donors had no trust in government, ministries turned a blind eye, informal settlements, people arrived and sat basically on the side of the road. In 2014, Lebanese government started stepping up and saying, oh, look, there's too many of them. We want money in return of them staying here. And from 2016 until now, Lebanon's government, its failing on international standards and principle, has been leading with the UN compliance. One political advisor told me, we Lebanonized the UNHCR. This is a very bad thing. This means that UNHCR became bad, complacent, corrupt, whereas UNHCR should have lifted up Lebanon. We Lebanonized UNHCR. Syrian refugees in Lebanon live in a veneer of governance. It means like a cover. It means like there's not really a government, okay? There's not really a governance. There is a question of how Lebanon manages major concessions to Hezbollah, using national dialogue tables, foreign patronage, the question of what Lebanon does. It colludes to disagree. So people are stuck, okay? Syrian refugees are stuck just as much as Lebanese are stuck. Sure, there is not a war, but there is not also a veneer of governance. A colleague that does research around gender and refugees will tell you that women refugees have nowhere to go to when they need help, when they need support. This is the big picture. I've nagged enough. Now I'm going to tell you what you can do in terms of thinking about your research and education. This is a finding of a 2-year project. It was called Refugee Education and Building Durable Futures, conducted together with PRIO in Oslo, the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Dr. Sarah Dryden-Peterson and Vidur Chopra. Together, we completed an ethnography. We said, okay, if there are all of these problems, how do we bring in refugee experiences so we can nuance policy, so we can nuance strategy? And together we did ethnographic work with students, 18 students, 101 classroom observations, and 93 interviews with students and their surrounding, parents, teachers, friends. And the main emerging themes from this is, you know, like I said in the beginning, when the refugees came, we said we need to put them in schools. We put them in schools, but they ended up being segregated. So in the morning shift, there are the Lebanese, and in the afternoon shift, there are the Syrians. Teachers are not equipped to deal with non-citizens, with non-Lebanese. Being raised in a more open context, in a different context than Syria, is problematic. And there is a question mark around the role of education as a vehicle for a better future. There's a question mark about what does it mean to study math and science and geography that you can't apply when you go back home to your country. So I'll just briefly present some findings. This is a paper that we are working on with colleagues at Harvard, Sarah, Vidur, and my research associate, Jumana at AUB. What do refugee people want their teachers to know? So if I take away the big picture politics, what do young people, 15-year-olds, 12 years old, 16-year-olds, what do they want their teachers to know? And what we realized is that conceptually there are, you know, 2 ways of thinking about refugee education. And as a child of a Palestinian refugee, you know, family, there is what we call an imagined future, what you hope to achieve. So young people's hope and imaginings for a long term, they want to travel, they want to get married, they want to, you know, become DJs, they want to become athletes. But there is also a plausible future, which is comprised of a set of possibilities of what is available to them as it pertains to visa, immigration, travel, health. Okay, if we can find alignment between the imagined and the plausible, then we can find a way for young people to begin to navigate what they're doing here with what they hope to achieve in the future in terms of whether they want to return home or immigrate to a different country. This, you know, very quickly, I promised I wouldn't take too much. How do we connect education to future building? In our conceptual framework, I'll not talk too much about this. We thought about structure, so how teaching occurs, content, what we teach people, pedagogy, the style, and what are relationship elements that refugee children are experiences. Of course, we transcribe the data, emerging analysis, etc. I will not bore you. This is what we found in terms of structures. Syrians have access to schools, but they don't attend schools with Lebanese students, so they feel isolated. Participants in the study felt behind in terms of studying later in the day because they are studying in the afternoon, so they go to school from 3 to 7. It's nighttime when they go home, and so they don't really have a chance to engage in the substantive academic manner that other students in the morning engage. Also, they felt they belong to second class, okay, citizenship. And these are, again, students who are between 12 and 16, who many of them have already spent 7 to 8 years in Lebanon. So they don't feel they belong. They don't have a refugee ID card. They're not nationals. And also they don't feel that their education, their school mirrors them. What I'm doing is I am reading off of here. So structure 1, content 2. Participants prefer the curriculum because it helps them pass grades. Okay. At the same time, they feel that there is reference to politics and social life that they can't discuss because nobody is teaching them Syrian dialect, Syrian politics. Nobody is talking to them about immigration. They're just teaching them science, math, geography. In terms of pedagogy, so style of teaching, the students identified elements of pedagogy that would support them in education. For example, explaining materials, balancing strictness with care, listening. The good news here is that participants, you know, responded to good pedagogy. They wanted to be questions. They wanted to be asked about their lives. They felt that they wanted to have power, but it was limited because the teachers were always like, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. And finally, relationships. Relationships are very important. refugees abroad, whether they are in Europe, in Spain, or in Lebanon, relationships are very important, okay? It's teachers that were able to foster relationships, foster equality, show that they care, support, build strong conversation, felt better. In particular, students at the school that we're calling Futures recalled that a great deal of detail that they felt powerless about issues that impacted them because there was a range of disciplinary measures that they couldn't feel that they could have power over. These instances made them feel that they had no voice over the micro, the day-to-day of their experience in school and in their surrounding. Just to conclude, I'm going to skip this just to talk about, looking forward. My book project is talking with Syrians who cannot return home. And I think that why education is important, and this framework that I presented about what is plausible and what is imagined. Like, I imagine I'm going to be rich, I'm going to marry the love of my life, I'm going to travel. But what is plausible? What is feasible? What we see emerging in the narrative is a dichotomy between what is imagined and what is feasible. There's a very big push in the world today about sending refugees back, the politics of return. And in my book, I talk to refugees who cannot return. Somebody tells me, look, I dream about it every day. I wish I can stop dreaming about it so much. It will never be, it cannot be home again. Syria is a black box. The ones who go in may never go out. And for people like me, it literally means suicide. So again, going back to education, you are all doing research on education. What is it that you are able to design in terms of securing plausible futures for refugees? What kind of futures? Where will these people go? Another quote. I almost died getting out, he tells me. I was put in a car trunk for about 2 days straight, a journey that normally takes 2 to 3 hours to enter into Masna border from Lebanon. To have gone through that, much fear, and then waltz back into the border is unimaginable. I cannot go back. What I will do next, I have no clue. A gender perspective. Life in Beirut made me more vocal, more open about my sexuality, my activism through art and writing. I can't imagine going back, even with all the guarantees in the world. The regime lies, kills, and gases its own people. Besides, even if a hypothetical scenario, there could be peace, my family will not accept me in this way. I know it's a lot. I just wanted to share the importance of education as a bridger, as a transitional phase in young people's lives, and to rethink together what is it that we are researching, publishing, producing, and teaching young people, besides geography, math, physics, and science, but actually mechanism and skill that would allow them to adapt to a life that is very confusing, that is very uncertain, and that is very dangerous if they are in Lebanon. Thank you. I'll take your questions.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Indeed, very, very challenging. I mean, speaking about, I guess those years, teenagerhood is always kind of difficult in terms of uncertainty. But I guess in that context, you put things in a different perspective, and I can imagine the situation must be, very, very difficult for all of them. So now we have some time for questions from the participants. We're going to open the floor, and we're going to connect with the classroom in University. Patricia, Sena. Sena is there directing the class. So if you want, we can open, if you have any questions from the students, we will give them the floor first, and then we will connect with other questions that I can be raised.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank Carmen for such an interesting talk, in which I personally have a lot that I relate to a lot, not personally on a personal level, but because of friends and friends of friends and family, and it's something that touches me on a personal level. I'm not Syrian, I'm from Jordan, so the area is just very close, and there are so many stories that I know of people and friends that are suffering from some examples that Carmen mentioned and others that are personal. So I don't know if you would like to start, guys, if you have any questions, maybe you raise your hand and you look at the camera so that Carmen gets the feeling that you're looking at her. Okay, let me start with a question, because I was taking notes of not necessarily questions, also comments that drew my attention while I was listening. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes, very well. So comments, but also advice, like if there's anything I missed, if there's something more interesting. I mean, this is not like to convince you with anything, just to tell you what I'm thinking about. So please, like, you know, you can say, if it's boring, you can tell me for the students, just tell me.
Yeah, that would be also good for them to just share their honest opinion. I'm just going to stand here so maybe you can see me. So the first things that drew my attention, as I mentioned before, all the stories that I know from friends and friends of friends. One particular story is my childhood friend. We grew up together in Saudi Arabia. We both lived there, and due to the circumstances in war in Syria, I am here living as a free human being, and she is in France as a refugee. And it's just it's a matter of life circumstances and just a little bit of luck or bad luck, depending on how you see it. Also, when we talk about things that should be taken into consideration when it comes to education and what should be talked about and what things should be avoided, I personally have participated a couple of times being a teacher or a teacher assistant in classes with refugees and immigrants. And there was this politically correct part related to what things to tackle and what things to avoid, because these people tend to come from very difficult situations, and maybe don't talk about family, maybe don't talk about things that might remind them of their life stories. So what do you think? To what extent do we have to respect this politically correct policy, if we can call it a policy? To what extent do we need to respect that? And to what extent do we have to tackle these topics? That's one.
Yeah, thank you for a difficult question. I think you know, the work I do around sort of inclusive policies and around education and gender in particular, I think it's important not to put the onus, like the effort, on individual people, right? You know, we can talk about things insofar that these things and these issues would help, you know, young people in particular integrate, and not to use them to feel bad or isolated, right? I mean, differences, we are all different, even in societies where we are not refugees, we may be the same religion or height or opinion. I mean, any community is diverse. Today in the classroom, there are 15 students, they are diverse. I think we can bring up these issues in conversing with refugees insofar that they are not considered obstacles, but that we can build around them structures and policies for inclusion. You know, not to make people feel bad based on what they're coming from or what their opinion is, but rather perhaps to collect enough data to design interventions that would be inclusive of everybody. Because my worry is that a lot of the interventions by the UN and others considers refugees as monolithic groups of people, like one block. And they are not one block. There are young people, old people, rich people, poor people, people who are scared to go back, people who want to go back, people who want to go to Canada, people who want to stay here, people who are entrepreneurs, who are math geniuses, who are beggars. I mean, human beings are not monolithic entities. So I think if the questions are not asked in a way that is exclusionary, like who am I leaving out or judging or discriminating? On the contrary, I want to understand the nuances and develop strategies to integrate nuances, then I think people will open up. Because, you know, enforced migration, it's somebody who had to leave their home at the middle of the night, who is looking to belong. This is why the framework that we shared around pedagogy, relationships, students respond not just to what you teach them, but how you treat them. So I think it may be the way that you ask the question and what you use that data for, not to survey people and to lock them at home, but to try to understand their different perspectives. I don't know if that answers you.
Yeah, it doesn't. I completely agree. It's not about not asking the question, it's about how you ask it and how you tackle the topics that are considered taboo or are considered, a big no-no, right? Okay, questions, guys?
Hi, Carmen, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm Ana Carballan. I'm the professor of the other class in cultural communication. And we discussed in our class a lot of things related to discrimination and prejudice and stereotyping and all these things. And I thought it was very interesting that you said Lebanese students go to class in the mornings, right? And Syrian students go to class in the afternoons. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Spend a little bit on that. Why is it organized that way? And who's it up to, like kind of change that policy? And I can more or less imagine what types of problems emerge, but maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that. I thought it was that kind of like segregation from the beginning. No, what is behind that?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very good question. I don't think that the intention initially was segregation. I think the intention was sort of giving space and giving access for Syrian refugee children. And the reason that I did this elaborate political introduction is to say that things were already not well in Lebanon when 1 million or 1.5 million refugees, depends how you count, came into the country. So now 1 in 4 young people are refugees. So I think that the design initially was, within an already overburdened and bad education system and poor. Suddenly refugees came, all this funding came. They intended to give them space. But what happens, because we are 10 years into the crisis, is this segregation, okay, where young people feel, look, we're getting less hours than our Lebanese counterparts. By the time, young people would say, by the time we go to sit on the desk, kids 12, 13 years old, they're eating chips and they're writing on desks and the teachers are tired. And, imagine like after 8 hours of working in an office, you then have another shift of an office. So that was a policy that the Ministry of Education undertook. I do believe it was not ill-intended, but the longer it lasted, the longer it created this feeling of discrimination. And also in the afternoon shifts, like things were like art and sports were cut out. So there was this focus on the most important things to help students to pass, right? Science, geography, math, etc. And so they would feel that the students that came in the morning, played football and played guitar and were able to hang out and have a break. But in the afternoon, like it was like military service, and it creates a segregation, of course, definitely, and it creates a lack of empathy. Because remember school, when we're 12, 13, 14, who our friends are, who our favorite teacher is, who we play sports with, who we fell in love with, all of this is part of the education experience. And what the refugee kids are suffering from is lack of relationships and focus on, you need to do well, you need to go, get grades, and then they go back home and they are living in horrible conditions, really. So they're losing the chance to use education as a vehicle for a plausible future. It stays as an imagined future. Like they think, right, if I study, I do well, I'm going to be an engineer. But how plausible is that? How possible it is? How much they are able to benefit from skills around them, networks around them, is very low, according to what we were able to identify. Mm-hmm. Did I answer you?
Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you.
So what are you interested in as students? What do you think about? Do you know Syrian refugees in Barcelona or in your school?
Have you ever met a refugee?
Have you met an Arab?
Yeah. In this case, yeah, because I'm their professor. But
Bueno.
I'm not sure if they have more like Arab contact with our Arabs from me. Sophia and then Martina.
Hi, good morning.
Hola.
Well, for me, as a refugee, I don't know, but as a Venezuelan, I kind of identify with what we all been through, and it's not just refugees, people with illegal papers trying to get by as also Venezuelans. And in some kind of way, I related for what was said, because my government is very little to help to my people, especially we are trying to find ways to get by as trying to progress, trying to move on, trying to be better persons and not being to be delayed for our conditions at home. So I wanted to know, as a modern language student, how could we help integrate our knowledges into the refugees? How can we, as modern students, help those in need to make a difference?
Me? I have to answer this difficult question?
Well, I don't know anyone.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for saying that it connects with your experience even in another part of the world. I know what it feels like. I think that what you can do is maybe, I don't know about modern language. I mean, that is a discipline that you can learn from your professors, but one thing you can do is surround people with a good support system if you can. So if you see students around you, young people, older people, you're going to graduate, you're going to be working somewhere, create a support system for people who come from persecuted background, from conflict background, because like you, they are looking for a way forward, to be grateful for what they have. The overwhelming findings from our research, not just on refugees, but on Arab women in general across the 11 countries, is that they want to work. They want to appreciate what they have. They want upward mobility. They care about their careers. People aren't feeling sorry for themselves. These young children we talked to, 12 to 16, they weren't sorry for themselves. They were grabbing life by what they can, but they were looking for somebody to talk to them, somebody to show them the way. So I would use your education, your language skills, your enthusiasm to just create a support system around people so that whatever they imagine can become plausible, right? I would channel it like this. What do you think? Am I making sense?
Yes, you are.
And you don't have to be from the Arab world, nor Syrian, nor from Venezuela, anywhere. But just let's catch each other, because I think particularly, I mean, all of this data is pre-pandemic. I think especially after the pandemic, the world is going to be so tough with vaccine passports and increase in gender-based violence and more anti-immigration. So I think what we can do is just hold each other, is use our research, our time, our knowledge, if you're doing modern language or math or Arabic or science, and just like pick each other up so people have a little bit of skills and a little bit of a support system. All the research that I showed, students didn't care about math and geography. They just wanted to talk. They wanted their teacher to love them, to like them, to clap for them. They wanted to play football. They wanted a clean desk because they saw the people in the morning had a clean desk, and they would come home in the afternoon to class and there was like garbage all around. They just wanted to feel important. Okay, it's not about having the best math or language or genius statistical skills. I'm very bad at this. It's about community, I think, is what we learn about probably the worst refugee crisis in the world, Syrians in Lebanon, but it's not the only. I could think that there are many people who leave their home, who look for community and structure.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I don't think she can see me, but hi. If you look at the camera, no, I'm like in the corner there, like. You can see my
I can see your hand and your shoes.
I was gonna ask because I know that like Arabic dialects, they're all different in different places. So I was gonna ask, how does like that affect students? Because I don't know how similar or different Syrian dialect is, or if they study in using modern standard Arabic, or how does that work?
So you are the experts in Arabic language, huh? I just live here, but Syrian Lebanon dialect is the Levant dialect. It's very similar, but also if you speak modern Arabic or written Arabic Fusha, you can talk to anybody in the Arab world. I don't know if that answers you.
Yeah, okay, so they wouldn't have like that much problem with the language.
No, Syria, Lebanon, zero problem. Like when they come here, language is not an issue at all. Accent is an issue. We make fun of each other. I don't know, in Spain, like Catalonia makes fun of Andalusia, like this kind of thing, but they understand each other, but they make fun of each other based on accent. I don't know if you say tha or kha, or right? It's like this, but language-wise, they understand each other. And if you are studying any kind of Fusha, anybody in the Arab world can understand you.
Yeah. Okay.
More questions?
Comments? Nothing. Absolutely.
I have a question, if I may. While they think of another question, I can join, and then we can follow up if you want. I mean, it's in relation to this idea of the segregation. No, you spoke a lot about connecting or building up these relationships. No, you said the students are segregated in the schools, but as you also mentioned that the refugees in Lebanon are not in camps. No, they're there. So can you explain a bit more what is the situation if there's other spaces other than the school to interact with the locals and have a bit more kind of build up other relationships there?
Yeah, so it's very challenging because even before the conflict in Syria, Lebanon had almost 300,000 to 400,000 Syrians coming in as seasonal workers. So this kind of moving across the border was not new to the conflict, but of course, after the conflict, it was an increased numbers and increased needs. And Lebanon, because it is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, does not recognize these people as legal refugees, and so did not organize them in the manner that Jordan and Turkey sort of organized employment and mobility. So most people arrive in informal settlements. There are middle-class Syrians, like there are any nationality, that are able to settle in the city, put their kids, in good universities, but in general, they are very informally organized and settling, which means that their labor and protection is very informal, and the interaction with Lebanese depends, I think, based on class. So how much you can afford. If you're a rich Syrian and you're renting a house in a city, you live like better than anybody. And if you are a farmer who just moved with 5 kids and you need to do your papers, it depends very much on the mercy of the employers. So it's very chaotic and an unequal situation, I would say, with almost zero protection, because the Lebanese government asked UNHCR to stop registering newborns since 2015. And the UN accepted. You know what I mean? Like that's what I was saying in the beginning about the whole governance framework. I mean, you as students, as researchers or activists, you have to push your governments to have better standards of human rights in this part of the world. Otherwise, people are just on the street. So that's, I don't know if I answered you, Olivia.
Yes, very much. Thank you. I don't know if we have any other questions from the classroom, or because there was a comment, but I think there are no other questions from the chat here.
We do have a question here.
Yes, so previously you talked about how students from Lebanon had the morning shift, and then the Syrian refugees had the afternoon shift. So I was wondering if at any given time there has been a possibility of maybe the school system trying to organize a program to maybe not like have the same shift, but maybe try to include somehow in some way the refugees into the morning shift, maybe with any kind of activity, or yeah, any kind of a program that could maybe include them a little bit more and more. I don't know, maybe making Lebanese students interact with them maybe once a week or something, so that they could feel more included.
Yeah, what's your name?
Miguel.
Pieri?
Miguel.
Michele, it's difficult because we're talking about the highest refugee per capita in the world, okay? The registered number are 1 in 4. So although I would like to criticize very much our government policy, as you can see, I am very vocal about this, it's very difficult because we're talking about removing people from one shift to another. We're talking about if you got a seat, asking you to give up your seat for somebody from another nationality, or, for example, asking your kids to stay an extra hour to play football. It's very difficult, particularly when the curricula is very competitive. People have to pass, national exams. So I think that there is a lot of informal extracurricular activities like NGOs, Save the Children, these kind of programs where people can sign up their students voluntarily, right, to do artwork or to do whatever music classes. But for the school, is what I was trying to say, it's very pressured, because you have, if you're a teacher, and these teachers are not bad teachers, I've interviewed all of them, they're good teachers, but they would tell me, look, I have 2 hours to do all of this, and you're getting me extra work. So I don't know of any program to merge them. Again, not because I'm defending the ministry, but the sheer number is just, this is the highest number of refugee proportion to capita in the world. It's very difficult. Now, there are a lot of civil society organizations, TV shows, etc. But as part of the national curriculum, no, it's very difficult to merge, because you are asking, I mean, look around you now, you are a class of 15. Imagine your professor comes tomorrow and says, 5 of you need to leave. You're going to study at night. We're going to get, I don't know, people from France to take your class, or Venezuela. It's very difficult, very, very difficult to merge, to combine physically.
Thank you. More questions, comments?
We have a question from the students that are connected online. It's if you don't mind, I will read it.
From Judith.
You can read it from Judith. Do you read it, or do you want me to? Are you reading it now, or you
read it better?
Yeah, I think it's Judith Blanco from University Juan Carlos. She said, Masal Khair, Carmen, I wanted to know if there is any other relevant refugee population others than the Syrians in Lebanon, and how do they build relationships among them, among refugees with different nationalities and background? I guess she's referring to maybe Syrians with Palestinian refugees or Iraqi refugees in Lebanon. Shukran.
Yes, perfect. Yes, there is a very big Palestinian population, as Olivia is saying, and also an Iraqi population. There's also a very large population of migrant domestic workers, particularly from places like Sudan. But the relationships are as securitized and segregated as you would imagine. So Palestinians, unlike Syrian refugees, are largely confined to formal settlements run by UNRWA and other Palestinian factions, whereas the Syrian population is much more dispersed. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, so I don't know a lot about the connection and relationships within these communities. Lebanon is a small place, for sure they interact, but the Palestinian case is totally different set of rules and regulations, and having UNRWA schools, whereas Syrian refugees really have nobody. They are at the mercy of somebody telling them, come into the classroom. And remember, all of this is even before Corona. I don't know what they're doing now. I don't know how many of them have phones or laptops to study. I mean, yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know if I answered it, but yeah, it's different governance. I mean, in terms of literature, it's different governance models. For sure, they meet. There are similar challenges and suffering, but there are different governance mechanisms. Yeah, and each of them are left more vulnerable than the other.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any other questions from the classroom.
Yes, we do have one.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, I think we all agree that the European Union has had a terrible policy regarding refugees. I don't know how to put it, like very selfish and unethical, unfair, probably. How much do you think this has to do with European public's opinion, with European media, with European governments? Because I always have the impression that because the public opinion is against, or a lot of the people in Europe are kind of like not going against the refugees, but going against the idea of accepting the refugees. This has come to lead the European governments into this idea that they're going to just lose the election if they allow this. So whose fault is it really? Is it or what is the problem? Where do you see the problem, and how can we? I mean, we obviously need to pressure our governments, and we obviously need to pressure the European Union. But what would be the strategy there to change things and to get the Europeans to understand that this is as much as their concern as it is any any other part of the world or third countries where they're kind of like putting the responsibility here and just, you know, closing the borders so unfairly. I don't know if my question makes sense there in your.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know in Spain if you have this saying like in the UK, those who can't do teach. I don't know. I mean, really, I don't know. I mean, I think that what we know after 10 years of the conflict and after everything Lebanon has been through is that there are pillars of life: food, water, education, work. There are pillars of life. And I don't think, I mean, the EU or the UN or even parts of the Lebanese government are ill-intended. I don't think they want people to die and feel lonely. But I think that, you know, our job as researchers is to nuance the interventions, is to bring to the table the conversation of what people are feeling, what creates stability. Maybe we have to frame it in terms of like, what is the interest of the EU? Like for my own government, I would tell them, look, your interest is to remove kids from the streets and teach them. And I will not tell them, look, your interest is human rights and gender. I mean, maybe it has to do with the way we do advocacy, the way we think about this. Maybe it has to do with future employers and the private sector saying, look, if you provide a quality education for all of these people, we can provide them with jobs. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. But I know that the current model of shoving people in classrooms and telling them read and write Arabic and math and English is not enough to create good citizens, people who feel a sense of belonging, people who feel, you know, protective over the land that they're part of, whether they are from Venezuela or Mexico or Lebanon or anywhere in the world. We have to do more. We have to do more. And it's gotten worse. Yani, I wish that we were having this conversation 2 years ago. After COVID, it's gotten worse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there are places in I was reading the other day about a survey they were doing in Hungary and how people were rejecting, you know, the refugees coming in. And then the second question was, how many refugees have you ever met? And there was none. Most, like 90% of the people had never met anybody from a refugee coming in. So I'm afraid that this is happening all over Europe now.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I mean, hopefully it's not too late to do something about it, but it would be, you know, interesting to see how each one of us could, you know, could help in that area. No, like you were saying before, what is your name?
Sophia.
Like Sophia was saying earlier, right, about integrating or getting people or getting that support system you were talking about. That's, yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's another question from it's another student from Veneer University, which is connected online. Is Gabriela López Restrepo. She says, "Hi Carmen, thanks for the conference. I have a question. If you were, this is another easy question, Carmen. If you were a member of the United Nations or of any organization that seeks to protect the rights of people, what would you do differently to change the situation of those who live in Lebanon?"
I know the answer. Fix the Lebanese government. Get a competent government that cares about human rights. This is our fault. We have a horrible system, is what I was trying to present to you. I wasn't trying to make you feel bad about refugees or make you feel bad about Europe or the UN. I'm saying these people arrived in hell of a situation, you know, for Lebanese and Palestinians and Syrians and Europeans. So I think if I was but an influential person in the UN, I would think about you know, integrating a more human rights approach to all of the governments. There needs to be a minimum pillars of life that cannot be negotiable. It doesn't matter who wins an election. It doesn't matter who wins a war. There needs to be an understanding in a post-pandemic world that there is a minimum survival: food, water, electricity, protection from gender-based violence, and schools and jobs. The rest people can decide on their own. But the idea that people's rights in the Middle East is up for elections, is up for decisions, is unacceptable. There needs to be a minimum. People don't need to be rich. They don't need to be happy. But there is a minimum standard of life. And I feel that the world order pre-pandemic has failed us, because it seems in the Middle East and North Africa that these things are up for elections. You know, maybe I will kill all of these people. Maybe I will prohibit them from going to school. Maybe I'm gonna stop, you know, protecting women. There are minimum that are not up for elections. It doesn't matter who is governing. Gaddafi, the Lebanese government, Syria, Palestine, it doesn't matter, right? So if I were in the UN, I would want to work towards a minimum life, like life, minimum, and education is minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Gabriela. I hope that you will be in the UN.
I hope the same.
So,
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
okay, fine.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about your activism as well, because you're a researcher, and sometimes, well, the research that it's actually done at the research group at Nebrija is about using teaching Spanish to migrant and refugee population as a tool for integration. But I work on more, let's say, theoretical stuff, and I think that sometimes we might get a bit, in the ivory tower and forget about how to apply that onto reality. And then you've been talking about governments and the United Nations and so on. So it seems like sometimes the power is in the hands of the people who are like up there in the policies. So I wanted to ask you about maybe like some grassroots initiatives that you've done, or that you think that could be done, examples from activism as a researcher.
I think the ivory tower is good. I think that over the last year and a half, the world problems, not just in Lebanon, have become so big, okay, that we are all, I mean, what you said, Laura, is very important. Like I teach, Spanish language in the middle of, a very severe global refugee crisis. And how can I use, my theory to support people? I think that we are all called to find ways to apply knowledge to our surrounding. It doesn't mean that we all quit our jobs and go volunteer somewhere, but I think we need to find like windows where we can apply our knowledge. And I think it's a spectrum. I mean, there's people who quit their job and go volunteer at an orphanage. And there's people who want to become politicians, and people who want to leave the academy to work at the UN. So in my experience, there's always been a very like dyadic relationship between the university and the community, right? I mean, I cannot go to class when there is 3,000 tons of explosives at the port. I can't. I have to find a way, if I'm working on gender or refugees, to combine the class with the community. And I'll send you now an article today. We wrote a colleague in analytical chemistry, okay? And she's saying, even I teach science, but after what happened at the port, we have to find a way to connect it. So my activism has been, I don't want to say like I'm an academic expert who went and become an activist, nor the opposite, that I am a street activist who is also a professor. I think they talk to each other and they feed each other. And all of us, no matter how theoretical we are or how mathematical we are, can find a way to, I think, advise and support and be there for communities. I think in COVID, this was very apparent when nurses and pharmacists and social workers and students, everybody was trying to either, cater for people's trauma or helping prevent or buying oxygen tanks. I think, Laura, this model is inevitable. It doesn't mean that we quit and we go on the street, but I think more and more, especially with recessions, universities will have to say, okay, what do you know? What did you figure out, and how we can make use of it? And really, that has been my career. But I'm in a particularly difficult part in the world because I was doing my PhD when the Arab Spring happened, and I was in Libya. So my work has always been inspired by this, because my life is extreme. But I think all of us can look outside the window and say, if I'm studying language, what can I do? If I'm studying nursing, what can I do? If I'm studying science, what can I do? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that can be inspiring for us to, as you said, I mean, this situation that push us to the limits, no, also makes us to also mobilize us, no, in that sense. So I hope the students will take notice of that, and we trust on them for the future in that sense.
Exactly. When I'm going to go retire, the students will take care of the rest.
So
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to you. And I guess we set an hour and something. We are already an hour and 10 minutes of our talk. I think for the online conference, we like to keep them short. We don't want to abuse too much of your time and your patience. We hope, as you said, that maybe we can have you soon in Madrid, hopefully, if things get better. And maybe you plan to travel stay in the coming months where we can organize something. Just going to pass the floor to the classroom in case let's take now. We didn't introduce you, Sena Al-Ahmoud, the professor in the University of Beirut there in the classroom. Sena, do you want to finish up with something? Any other questions, or we can close up here if you want. There's a new message. I don't know. Yes, just anything.
Final question, maybe. If not, I would just like to insist one more time on what I think Carmen finished saying, is that I think all of us can do something from our own place. We don't have to change radically our lifestyles or our realms of study or the way that we're living. We can all do something from where we are. And just one thing that I will take with me as an applied linguist: I'm not into politics, I'm not into economy, it's not my thing. I intentionally avoid these areas, but for my own path as an applied linguist, I will take with me what you said about asking them about what they want to know. And it's about customizing, making it personal, and treating all types of students, be it a refugee, an immigrant, or just people from different backgrounds, and try as much as possible to find these points in common and see what they want to know and what they want to learn from life, and not just separate them because of their backgrounds or life circumstances. So I'm taking this with me home. Again, thank you very much, Carmen, for your talk and for your time.
My pleasure. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for inspiring me. Thank you so much, really.
Thanks to
Hope
you.
to meet you soon.
Thank you.
So good afternoon to everybody, and I hope to see you in the following session. We have the following session of Aula Árabe will be next week, and it will be on Syria, which is we were talking about the Syrian refugees. This will be about the Syrian conflict 10 years later, with Salam Kawakibi, who will be talking about what is the perspective of the situation of the conflict itself in the country. So thanks again to all of you for participating and collaborating in what has been a very, very interesting debate. We have many people thanking in the chat. So just to thank you again, Carmen.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye, stay safe.